Hey, what's up everybody? The Nikon D60 came in the mail today, so thought I'd do something a little bit different, just kind of take you guys behind the scenes on what it's like when I get a new camera in. We'll just go for a quick walk around the neighborhood. I'll take some pictures and just give you guys kind of like a general first impressions and my initial thoughts on the camera. So anyway, yeah, let's take a lap around the neighborhood. The lens I've got today is the Tamron 18-250. This is kind of an older lens. I used to use this a lot back in the old days on my Nikon D90, like around 2009, 2010. Does tend to be a pretty good all-around lens for just a photo walk like this. One thing that really surprised me about the D60 is just how small it is. I should have realized because it uses the same battery as the Nikon D5000 and not the same one as, say, the Nikon D90. And that's kind of a good point of reference to get a sense of what this camera's like. Think of it more as an entry-level camera like a D3000 or a D5000, and less of a more enthusiast camera like a D90. In terms of price, I got this camera for $30. Well, actually, I got it for $15. Camera was $15, and then tax and shipping was another $15. But yeah, literally like right around 30 bucks. It was listed for parts as is. This particular seller didn't have a battery or a charger for the camera, so they had no way to test it. And that's kind of a good tip for you guys who are new to buying used cameras. A lot of times when they're listed for parts as is, unless there's an obvious problem, you have to read the description. Like, if there's an actual problem, then it just doesn't work, don't buy it. But so much of the time, a camera just doesn't have a battery or it doesn't have a charger, and so the seller has no way to test it, so they just sell it for parts. Meanwhile, it's like a good 90% of the cameras I bought for these reviews were actually sold for parts or as is, and they're actually perfectly fine. I've got an Olympus E300 review coming up next week. That's another one. I got that camera and a kit lens for 75 bucks because it was the same thing. The seller didn't have a charger for it, so they had no way to test it. I got it home, threw the battery from my E500 in there, and it's like, oh, it worked right away. There was nothing wrong with it at all. So yeah, you got to keep that in mind. It is a little bit of a gamble. There could be times where you buy it and it looks fine and it really doesn't work. I'm just saying from my own personal experience, 90% of the time, it's actually been perfectly fine. The colors on this camera tend to be kind of typical Nikon colors, sort of not overly saturated with kind of emphasis on blues and greens, and I like that. I like that a lot about these old Nikon cameras. Some other things I like, the ergonomics on this camera are pretty good for a small camera. It's actually pretty comfortable in the hands. The other thing that's a real bonus on this camera is the LCD screen is actually really good. Good for an older camera. For someone like me who constantly reviews these old cameras, I'm used to these small, like 1-inch screens with like 115K dot resolution, but this is actually all right. Like, this is something my aging eyesight can actually see. Man, I forget how much I love this crazy zoom range for just walking around. Being able to go as wide as 18 to as tight as 250 millimeters, it's absolutely insane. I remember now why I used to love this lens so much back in the old days. Like, look at something like this. You can take a boring shot that's on the side of like an obviously busy road and zoom to 250, and the next thing you know, you're on a vineyard in Italy. Maybe not, but it does look much better than just seeing like just a boring, busy road. You know, something that surprised me, I was taking pictures with this camera earlier at home, and I had it in aperture priority. Most cameras that I've been testing lately, they're very obsessed with the highlights. They always try to protect the highlights. Much to my surprise, this camera in aperture priority didn't really care about the highlights. It sort of understood that there was a subject in the shadows, and it would kind of expose a little bit more for the subject in the shadows than for the highlights themselves. You know, that's just something interesting. It's worth noting. A lot of times when I do these photo walks that are like the first day with the camera, I always stop here at this lake and take a picture just to kind of check out dynamic range. And 99% of the time, it's like the highlights are properly exposed and everything else from like the water down to the grass is just dark shadows. The D60 looks like it has actually pretty good dynamic range, you know. I'll need to see these on the computer, but it looks like it does a good job exposing both for the highlights and for the shadows. So yeah, first impressions of the D60 are actually really positive. I've liked the experience a lot, actually. I'll need to see the pictures on the computer to really get a sense of it, but so far it's been very positive. Anyway, I think that's all I've got for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.